It all started when our neighborhood HOA had their annual potluck dinner. My wife, who's always been known for her amazing cooking, decided to make her special lasagna. She spent the whole day preparing it with love, using her own homemade sauce and freshly grated cheese. She was so excited to share it with everyone, but that night, things didn't go the way we expected. When we arrived at the community hall, everyone was setting their dishes on long tables covered in white cloth. The room was buzzing with laughter, small talk, and the smell of freshly baked food. My wife gently placed her lasagna in the middle of the table, smiling proudly, hoping everyone would enjoy it. Then came Karen. Every neighborhood has one, right? That one person who always finds something to complain about. She walked over with that tight smile of hers, the kind that doesn't reach her eyes. She leaned in, took one whiff of my wife's dish, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Oh dear, that smells a bit burnt, doesn't it?" The room went silent for a moment. My wife's smile faded just a little. She tried to laugh it off, saying softly, "Oh no, it's just the sauce. It's roasted tomatoes, that's all." But Karen wasn't done. She chuckled and said, "Well, I hope it tastes better than it smells." I could see the embarrassment wash over my wife's face. She'd spent hours making that meal, pouring her heart into it. But instead of kindness, she got mocked in front of everyone. A few people laughed awkwardly, while others quickly looked away. No one spoke up. Not even me, at least not yet. As the night went on, people started serving themselves. My wife's lasagna sat there untouched for a while, right next to Karen's casserole that looked more like dog food than dinner. But people kept taking that one instead. Maybe out of politeness, maybe out of fear of being mocked next. My wife just smiled through it all, her eyes dim but still kind. I remember her whispering to me, "It's okay. Maybe they just don't want pasta tonight." But I could hear the sadness in her voice. She didn't deserve that. Not from anyone, and especially not from someone like Karen. Later that evening, when most people were done eating, one of the HOA members finally tried the lasagna. I watched as his eyes widened after the first bite. Then he took another and another. "This is incredible," he said loudly, his fork already going back for more. Slowly, others followed. And just like that, the dish that was once ignored became the talk of the table. People began asking my wife for the recipe. The same folks who had laughed awkwardly earlier were now smiling at her, praising her cooking. Even Karen looked uncomfortable. She didn't say much, just mumbled something about different tastes, and went back to pretending she was busy cleaning up. But the damage was done. My wife smiled politely at the compliments, but I could tell her heart wasn't in it anymore. On our way home that night, she was quiet. Usually she'd hum in the car or talk about the evening. But that night, she just stared out the window, her hands folded in her lap. When we got home, she sighed and said softly, "Maybe I'll just buy something next time. No one needs my cooking. That broke me." I knew how much pride she took in her food. Cooking wasn't just something she did, it was her love language. Every dish she made carried a piece of her heart. I couldn't let that mean, thoughtless comment steal that from her. The next morning, she was back in the kitchen, quietly cleaning up. I watched her move around, still gentle, still caring, but her spark, the one I loved seeing, was dim. I walked up behind her and hugged her. "Your food is amazing," I said. "You know that, right?" She smiled faintly. "You have to say that," she replied. But I didn't. I meant it. Her lasagna was the best thing I'd ever tasted. And I decided right then, if the HOA didn't appreciate her, I'd make sure the world did. That's when I suggested it. "Why don't we open a little place of our own?" I said. "A small restaurant. where people can really enjoy your cooking. She laughed at first, thinking I was joking. "Oh, come on," she said. "Who'd want to eat my food after last night?" "Everyone," I told her. "Everyone who gets one bite of your lasagna would come back for more." She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes soft but unsure. Then she said, "Maybe one day." But that one day came sooner than we expected. A few weeks later, a friend of ours told us about a small cafe space that had just gone up for rent on Main Street. It wasn't fancy, but it was cozy, just right for her kind of food. I could see the spark come back in her eyes as we peeked inside. The sunlight touched the old wooden tables, and it felt like the space was waiting for her. We decided to take a leap of faith. We sold a few things, dipped into our savings, and signed the lease. It wasn't easy, we were scared. But my wife's eyes shined again as she painted the walls, arranged the tables, and planned the menu. And guess what the first item on that menu was? Her famous lasagna. When opening day came, I'll admit I was nervous. What if no one showed up? What if the memory of that HOA dinner haunted her again? But by noon, the place was packed. Friends, neighbors, and strangers all filled the little cafe. The smell of her food floated through the air, warm and comforting, like home. I watched people's faces as they took their first bites, smiles, laughter, happy tears. The same dish Karen mocked had people asking for second servings. My wife looked radiant, her laughter filling the room like music. And that, right there, was worth everything. We closed late that night. As she wiped the counters, she looked at me and said softly, "Maybe I'm not that bad a cook after all." I laughed. "You're the best, and now everyone knows it." But life has a funny way of bringing things full circle. And in our case, it happened in a way I could have never imagined. Because a few weeks later, Karen walked in. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when it happened. The restaurant had been open for a few months now, and word had spread around town about my wife's cooking. People loved her food, not just because it tasted amazing, but because it made them feel something. Every dish had warmth, kindness, and comfort, like a hug on a plate. That day, the bell above the door jingled, and in walked someone familiar. My wife was behind the counter, smiling at a couple of regulars when she froze. Her smile faded just a little, her hands pausing mid-air. I turned around to see who it was, and there she stood. Karen. She looked exactly the same. Perfectly styled hair, expensive purse, and that same tight smile. But this time, her eyes were scanning the place with curiosity. She didn't recognize us at first. She was just another customer walking into a restaurant she'd probably heard about from her little HOA circle. I could almost hear my heart beating. My first instinct was to say something snarky, something that would remind her of that night when she made my wife feel so small. But I didn't. I looked at my wife, waiting to see what she'd do. She took a deep breath, fixed her apron, and walked up to the counter with that gentle grace she always carried. "Good afternoon," she said kindly. "Welcome to Olive and Oak. Table for one?" Karen blinked, still not realizing. "Yes, please," she said, glancing around the cozy dining room. "I've heard the food here is surprisingly good." I could almost laugh at that. Surprisingly good. The same word she might have used to mock someone. My wife led her to a small table by the window and handed her the menu. Then she came back to me in the kitchen, her face calm but her eyes full of quiet strength. "I'll take care of her table," she said softly. "Don't say a word." And so, I didn't. I just watched. A few minutes later, Karen called over my wife. "What's the best thing on your menu?" she asked, pretending to study the list, though her eyes were already set on one dish. My wife smiled gently. "Our lasagna is our most popular item," she said. "It's made fresh every morning with homemade sauce." Karen's brows lifted. "Lasagna, huh? Interesting. I'll try that." My wife nodded politely, jotting it down. She turned to go, and I saw her hand tremble just a little. But her chin stayed high. She went into the kitchen, tied her apron tighter, and started preparing the dish that had once been laughed at. As the lasagna baked, the smell filled the room, rich, warm, full of memories. The same scent that had once made Karen wrinkle her nose now had every other table smiling and hungry. When it was ready, my wife plated it carefully, wiped the edge of the dish clean, and carried it out herself. She set it in front of Karen with a quiet smile. "Here you go," she said. "I hope you enjoy it." Karen looked down at the dish, took her fork, and cut into it. She brought a bite to her mouth, and I swear I saw the change instantly. Her eyes widened. She chewed slowly, then took another bite, then another. Her lips parted slightly, as if she couldn't believe what she was tasting. After a few moments, she called my wife over. This is incredible," she said softly. "It's the best lasagna I've ever had." My wife smiled kindly. "Thank you. I'm glad you like it." Karen nodded, still eating. "You must be new here. Who owns this place?" For a moment, my wife looked at her quietly. Then she said, "My husband and I do." Karen paused mid-bite. "Oh," she said, glancing toward me. Her eyes squinted, trying to place the face. I stepped forward from the kitchen, wiping my hands. "Hello, Karen," I said with a polite smile. "It's been a while since the HOA potluck, hasn't it?" Her fork froze in her hand. Her face turned pale as the realization hit. "Oh my, this is your restaurant?" she stammered. I nodded. "Yes, my wife's recipes and the same ones she brought to that potluck." Silence hung in the air for a few seconds. The color drained from her cheeks. She glanced at my wife, who was just standing there, calm, kind, but with a quiet dignity that words couldn't touch. Karen swallowed hard. I didn't realize," she said awkwardly. "That night I didn't mean—" My wife cut her off gently. "It's okay," she said softly. "Sometimes people don't recognize good things right away." That sentence, soft as a whisper, landed heavier than any insult could. It wasn't angry. It wasn't revenge. It was grace. The kind that makes a person truly reflect on what they've done. Karen lowered her eyes, shame written all over her face. "Your food is amazing," she murmured. "You really have a gift." My wife smiled faintly. "Thank you, Karen. That means a lot." Then she walked away, back to the kitchen, her head held high. For the rest of her meal, Karen didn't say much. She ate quietly, almost reverently, finishing every bite. When she was done, she asked for the check, but my wife refused payment. "It's on the house," she said gently. Consider it a neighborly gesture. Karen looked stunned. She tried to insist, but my wife simply smiled. "Kindness always tastes better when it's shared," she said. When Karen left, she paused at the door. She turned back and said, "I was wrong about you, about that night." "I'm sorry." My wife nodded with a soft smile. "Apology accepted." And just like that, she was gone. As soon as the door closed, I walked over to my wife and hugged her. "You handled that perfectly," I whispered. She leaned against me and said quietly, "You can't fight bitterness with bitterness. You just show them love and let time do the talking." I'll never forget that moment. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about grace. quiet, powerful grace. The next week, something unexpected happened. The HOA held another meeting, and this time the tone was different. Karen actually stood up in front of everyone and said, "I'd like to recommend that our next event be catered by Olive and Oak, owned by one of our own neighbors, who makes the best food I've ever had." My wife was speechless when she heard that. The same woman who once mocked her was now praising her in front of the whole neighborhood. Life has a funny way of turning tables, doesn't it? When the HOA ordered food for their next gathering, my wife personally prepared everything: lasagna, garlic bread, her famous lemon pie. When the event ended, people were lined up asking her for seconds and for her restaurant. A few months passed after that unforgettable day. The restaurant grew busier than we ever imagined. What started as a small dream, just a way for my wife to share her love of food, had become something much bigger. People from all over town came to eat her dishes, to talk to her, to feel that warmth she put into everything she made. She'd walk around the tables, chatting with everyone like they were old friends. You could see it in their faces, the comfort, the joy, the connection. Her food didn't just fill stomachs, it filled hearts. One afternoon, as she was closing up, she found a little card left on one of the tables. Inside was a handwritten note. It said, "Thank you for reminding me that kindness still exists. You changed how I see people and myself." At the bottom it was signed, Karen. My wife stood there holding that note for a long moment, her eyes soft with emotion. Then she smiled, folded the card carefully, and placed it in her recipe book, the same one she used the night of the HOA potluck. She didn't say much, but I knew what she was thinking. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of anger. And that's exactly what she did. A few weeks later, something even more surprising happened. Karen started showing up again, this time not to eat alone, but with friends. She'd bring her book club, sometimes her husband, sometimes even neighbors from the HOA. And every time she'd tell them proudly, "You have to try the lasagna. Life sure has a way of coming full circle." The woman who once humiliated my wife was now her biggest supporter. But my wife never bragged. She never said, "I told you so." She never mentioned that night again. She just kept cooking, smiling, and welcoming everyone who walked through the door, even those who didn't deserve it once. That's the kind of strength you can't fake. One evening, as we were cleaning up after a busy day, I asked her, "Do you ever think about that night, the potluck?" She smiled softly. "Sometimes," she said. "Not with anger anymore, though. Just gratitude." "Gratitude?" I asked, surprised. "Yes," she said. "If that night hadn't happened, I might have never found the courage to open this restaurant. Sometimes, the things that hurt us the most end up guiding us to where we're meant to be." I'll never forget that line. It hit me like a wave, because she was right. What once felt like an insult became the spark that lit a new chapter in our lives. A few weeks later, we were invited back to another HOA dinner, this time as the official caterers. My wife hesitated at first. "Do you think I should?" she asked. I looked at her and smiled. "Why not? Let them taste what love really tastes like." And so, she did. That evening, as people gathered in the same hall where she was once mocked, there was a different kind of energy in the air. The same tables, the same neighbors. But this time, they were lined with trays of her food, each one prepared with care and pride. When everyone started eating, the compliments poured in. "This lasagna is out of this world." "Who made the pie?" "This is the best food we've ever had at an HOA event." And there she was, standing quietly in the back, smiling. No ego, no bitterness, just peace. Karen even gave a little speech that night. She said, "Sometimes we judge people before we know their story. Sometimes we forget that everyone has something special to offer. Tonight we're lucky to have someone among us who turned my rude words into something beautiful." She raised her glass toward my wife and said, "To the best cook and the kindest soul in our neighborhood." Everyone clapped. My wife smiled shyly, her eyes glistening. It was more than just applause. It was healing. It was justice, but the gentle kind. The kind that doesn't hurt anyone. After the dinner, as we walked back to our car, she slipped her hand into mine. The night was cool, quiet, and full of stars. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think that night broke me. But now I see how it built me." I squeezed her hand. "It built us," I said. She laughed, and the sound of it, light, free, full of joy, was everything I'd ever hoped to hear again. From that night on, the restaurant became even more than a business. It became a symbol, a little reminder to everyone in our town that kindness, patience, and grace can change hearts more than anger ever could. People came not just for the food, but for the story. They'd say things like, "We heard what happened," or "We came because your story gave us hope." My wife always smiled and said, "Everyone has a story. This just happens to be ours. Sometimes life gives you people like Karen to test you, to see if you'll break or rise." My wife didn't just rise, she shined. She turned cruelty into compassion, mockery into motivation, and pain into purpose. And that's what makes her so special, even now. Years later, the restaurant still stands. Cozy, warm, always smelling like roasted tomatoes and freshly baked bread. The walls are covered with photos of happy families, thank you notes, and even that little card from Karen, framed right near the door. People who come in often ask about it. My wife just smiles and says, "That card reminds me that everyone deserves a second chance, even the ones who hurt us." And that's how she lives, with grace, with love, with a heart that forgives even when it doesn't have to. Every time I watch her serve someone a plate of lasagna, I think back to that first potluck, that moment that started it all. And I realize something important. Sometimes, the things meant to tear us down are actually the very things that lift us up. If there's one thing we've learned through all of this, it's that kindness doesn't make you weak. It makes you powerful in a way cruelty never can. So, to anyone listening or reading this, remember this simple truth. Never let someone's bitterness steal your joy. Keep doing what you love. Keep giving, keep believing, keep forgiving. Because one day the world will see your worth, just like they saw my wife's. And when that day comes, don't look back with anger. Look back with gratitude, because every pain has a purpose. Every insult hides a lesson. And every storm brings a new sunrise. If you've ever been judged, mocked, or doubted, remember this story. You don't have to fight back with hate. Just rise. With love, with patience, and with pride in who you are. And if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Because kindness, true kindness, always wins in the end.